Jimmy Carr believed he could make a joke about the genocide of Gypsy Roma people and get away with it. After an outcry on Twitter, it appears that assumption might have been faulty, but you can see why he made it. There are many ways in which hostility to Gypsy Roma people is Britain's most acceptable prejudice. According to The Independent, people of Roma origin, Gypsies and Irish travellers experience more racism than any other group in the UK. A 2008 Maury poll showed that a third of UK residents admitted to being prejudiced against them. Someone who knows that only too well is Billy Welsh. He is head of the Gypsy and Traveller community in the UK. He spoke to LBC. Here he explains why he didn't find Carr's joke funny.
Nothing is beyond the pale when it comes to humour.
No, it's not true.
Not true.
And that statement is as false as Jimmy Carr's laugh. Because the Nazi guards, the SS, they laughed. And it's like the rabbi said before, when I heard the crowd laughing, it struck fear into my heart. To think that we can live in this society, 21st century Britain, and this can be made a joke out of.
Yeah.
Not that long ago, still in living memory.
When it
you know what? Funny, and he can make all the excuses he likes. That excuse is false. That's a false excuse. As false as a laugh what he's got.
Yeah. You know, just Billy, you understand. I'm pushing a point. We're trying to have a discussion about where humour lies, where the line lies, and it's a difficult subject. I really appreciate you contributing to this. And
can I stop you for a second?
Please.
Could he have said that about the Jewish people? You wouldn't have dared say it about the Jewish people.
Well, I think...
But there's a form of racism in this country, and this racism towards Gypsy people and travelling people, and it's totally, perfectly accepted.
Yeah.
In this country.
Rabbi Jonathan Romain was offended by the audience reaction. Were you surprised that they laughed? Were you offended that they laughed?
There were some people whistling and jeering and showing their approval of what happened to the Gypsies in their audience. I'm as disgusted in the audience as I am in Jimmy Carr. I don't know what disgusted me the most. The fact that he would stand up and say it, or the fact that the people were sitting in their audience.
Carr's joke concerned the Romani genocide in Nazi-occupied Europe. Between 220,000 and 1.5 million Roma are thought to have been killed by the Nazis. That's between a quarter and 3/4 of the continent's Roma being wiped out. We should warn you that you may find some of the following content disturbing. So the first anti-Roma persecutions by the Nazis were aimed at what the Germans called Gypsy mongrels, that's stationary Roma and Sinti who from 1943 were imprisoned in concentration camps, including in the Gypsy camps at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. But travelling Roma were also executed by mobile killing squads that travelled from village to village, slaughtering Roma wherever they found them. Those who were not murdered outright in the camps or used as slave labour were often subject to medical experimentation by the Nazis, often conducted by notorious doctor Josef Mengele. Mengele, who was tasked with working out how to breed the master race, had a particular interest in Gypsy children. Vera Alexander was a Jewish woman imprisoned at Auschwitz who had 50 sets of Gypsy twins in her care. At the Eichmann trial in 1961, she gave this horrifying testimony. I remember one set of twins in particular, Guido and Ina, aged about 4. One day, Mengele took them away. When they returned, they were in a terrible state. They had been sewn together, back to back, like Siamese twins. Their wounds were infected and oozing pus. They screamed day and night. Then their parents, I remember the mother's name was Stella, managed to get some morphine and they killed the children in order to end their suffering. That's what Jimmy Carr was joking about. Now, of course, little could reach these levels of horror, the horrors of the Nazi Holocaust. But the UK also doesn't have a great record when it comes to the persecution of Gypsy Roma communities. State discrimination against the community goes back to at least 1960, when the Caravan Sites Act came into force. That prevented the building of new caravan sites in England, and what followed was predictably the mass eviction of Gypsies, Roma and travellers, as well as increased public harassment. This video is from Kent in 1962.
It was a sad time for the Gypsies of Darentwood, Kent. They were going to be evicted. Labour MP Norman Dodds pleaded for them, but the parish council, which owns the 16-acre site, was determined to get the Romanis out. The Dartford Rural District Council, possessing the necessary powers, carried out the eviction. So, after 4 years of living here, they had to go. Caravans without horses were towed away. Supporting Norman Dodds was the Vicar of Durrance, who says the eviction was an unchristian act. Most of the caravan colony here had lived by collecting scrap metal. Now they say they'll have to go on public relief. It all seems a pity, for while the gypsies cling to their traditional way of life, it's hard to fit them into the second half of the 20th century. Wherever they go, there's prejudice against them. Wherever they stay becomes a rural slum.
8 years later, Harold Wilson's Labour government passed a new Caravan Sites Act, which made the government responsible for the provision of caravan sites for travellers. So it's a good development, but still, sites were scarce. This is from a 1972 programme called Gypsy Problem, filmed in Bromley, Kent.
Well, we've always been very receptive to gypsies in Kent and in this area, but we're now getting far more than our fair share, and whatever we do, we just get more. And we've had 3 areas in my own constituency whereby trespass and just straight evasion. We've had varying from 20 to 40 caravans that have done the most appalling damage. They leave mountains of junk because a lot of them indulge in breaking down cars and selling the bits. And the ratepayers feel very, very strongly that they break all the local rules, which if they did the same thing, they'd find themselves in the magistrates' court. And we think we've done our stint here.
You were parked here illegally on council land. Why is that?
Well, because we've got nowhere to go.
How hard have you tried to look for somewhere else to go?
Well, we've stopped everywhere else around here, and they won't let us rest nowhere else.
There's absolutely nowhere else for you to go?
There's nowhere else for us to go.
What do you all think about, as a final question, what do you all think about the residents who are complaining about you?
They don't like gypsies.
They don't like gypsies.
They don't like gypsies.
They like gypsies.
Especially these people around this area. So it's down the pub, one of the pubs down here, they won't serve you. They won't serve you with a glass of beer, and they won't serve you with no cigarettes, sir. And the law is there's no discrimination in this country today. But there's plenty of discrimination in this country today, sir. Because they won't serve us they won't even serve us with a packet of fags, sir.
Unbelievably, it was only in 1989 that Romani gypsies were first recognised as an ethnic minority under the law and so protected by the Race Relations Act. Travellers wouldn't be recognised as such until 2000. Back to the question of housing and sites, we suggested the Caravan Sites Act may have been insufficient. However, even that would prove too much for the Tories. In 1994, the Conservative government reversed it via the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. That freed the government of responsibility to provide accommodation sites, and instead, local councils were made to identify private land for purchase by travellers. Not a single local council did this. That failure by local councils was able to go unchallenged, largely because hostility to gypsies was so widespread. Tragically, in 2003, 15-year-old Irish traveller Johnny Delaney was kicked to death in Cheshire. His younger sister Nellie penned this account of his death. My brother Johnny went over to Ellesmere Port to invite 2 of his friends over to join the family party. It was a hot summer's day, so on the way home they went into a shop to buy some potato crisps and lemonade. But there were some nasty boys inside the shop, and they started to threaten Johnny and his friends and call them horrible names. When the boys left the shop, Johnny asked the shopkeeper if he could look to see if it was safe for them to go outside. Yes, the man said, it looks like they have gone now. When they got outside, Johnny and his friends decided to take the shortcut home across the park. But the 8 boys appeared from nowhere and started to chase Johnny and his friends across the field. Johnny's friend got caught, so Johnny went back to help him. He managed to get him free, but Johnny got caught. The nasty boys then started kicking Johnny in the head and chest until finally Johnny died. A man was passing by walking his dog. He shouted at the boys, "Why did you do that?" One of the nasty boys shouted back to him, "He deserved it. He was only an effing gypsy." A judge at the trial that followed ruled that the killing was not racially motivated. His killers were convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to just 4.5 years. The public hostility that exists towards Gypsy Roma people can in large part be laid at the doorstep of our toxic media. For example, in 2005, the Sun newspaper launched its Stamp on the Camps slogan and ran a targeted campaign of harassment, even declaring a war on gypsies. Speaking to the BBC, Mike Jempson of MediaWise said, They are even demanding revisions to the Human Rights Act. I've not seen anything like this since the Julius Streicher Nazi campaign against Jews. It intrigues me that they take the people who they know they can get away with being offensive about because they know no one will defend them, and they use that to try to overturn human rights legislation. More recently, in 2011, 100 traveller families were evicted from Dale Farm. Though the farm was owned by travellers and Basildon Council had granted permission for a small number of families to park their caravans on the farm, they repeatedly denied the travellers permission to increase the numbers on the property. After several years of legal battles, the council was authorised to evict the travellers, which they did ruthlessly.
I'm shocked that they're doing this. It's not really good. Dim police, or they may go away because they're evil.
Are you scared?
Yeah.
This is going to blow any minute at all, and we're going to be blew to smithereens. They said they were going to have a peaceful eviction, but there's nothing peaceful about them. They're really, really being violent. And it's not the bailiffs, it's the police. There's no bailiffs even in the site yet. It's just all police. I mean, they've taser guns, they've batons, they've everything. Meg, show me her face. Look at her face.
They came out to just start shoving us all out of the way, so I fell and hit the face off the wall. They were rough.
The argument the council made justifying that eviction concerned a failure to acquire planning permission by all people on the site. That has always been incredibly difficult for traveller communities to acquire, though, and the setting up of legal camps has only got harder. As I've already explained, legislation in the 1990s shifted responsibility for providing sites for travellers to local councils. That originally included both gypsy travellers who lived nomadic lifestyles and those who lived stationary lives. That all changed, though, in 2015 when legislation redefined gypsy travellers as those who move around for work. The EHRC described the consequences of that move, explaining, "Our research found that when local planning authorities assessed how many pitches they would need to meet the needs of gypsies and travellers following the change in definition, the requirement fell by almost 75%. This suggests that the needs of a significant number of people in the gypsy and traveller community who still require culturally appropriate accommodation but no longer follow a nomadic lifestyle are not being considered." In other words, the change in the legal definition of traveller communities made it easier for councils to deny travellers, Roma and gypsies the right to live their traditional lifestyle, even when they owned the land.
You know, racism doesn't come out of the air. I don't think of it as a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's something which has to be reinforced politically, socially, culturally. And what begins the process of dismantling the institutions that reinforce that racism is recognition. Now, there has been some progress over the last 60 years when it comes to recognizing other forms of racism. It's not perfect. In some cases, it is the bare minimum, but there has been some process of recognition. I don't think there's been a similar cultural shift in terms of recognizing that you can be racist against the GRT community. That use of slurs, that use of stereotyping to imply that they're all criminals, that they're all dangerous, that the way in which the state relates to the GRT community in terms of extreme discrimination and state violence, that hasn't permeated our culture at all. Quite the opposite. I think that the view that there is something inherently criminal about the GRT community is dominant. And it's something which, as I said before, is repeated uncritically by people who would otherwise absolutely never dream of stereotyping another community in a similar way. I'm not sure if you've ever worked in hospitality, Michael, but before Novara got me on that lovely full-time contract, I was working in pubs. And every single pub that I ever worked in, you would be informed when you started work there, or like if someone comes in and they look like they're a gypsy, don't serve them. Right? That is just a completely normal thing to hear within the hospitality sector. Now I remember, just because I was like, I'm not doing that because that's discriminatory, and I would just serve anyone who came into the pub if they were overage and not like really, really drunk or whatever. I just serve serve like people from the GRT community like I would serve anybody else, I'd literally get in trouble for it. And there was no way to get people within that context to recognize like what you're asking your staff to do is impose a discriminatory service practice, which is illegal. Now, that's happening in pubs up and down the country. It's happening in hotels up and down the country. It happens in supermarkets. It's happening, in any kind of service interaction that you can think of. And it's not recognized as racism because it's not enforced as an anti-discrimination policy the way that you do have a degree of enforcement when it comes to other minoritized groups. And that context means that people like Jimmy Carr thinks that it's funny and that it's acceptable to imply that, yeah, you're right, the GRT community are social undesirables. We'd be better off without them.